As we conclude our series of videos that compare Excel desktop version with Excel online version and the 3 ribbons that are included with those versions, we would like to look at Page Layout tab today. There may be considerable differences as we've seen in some of the versions of the ribbons, and then again there may be very few differences in those 3 ribbons, but we'll find out for sure. Hi, I'm Terry, one of the Digital Innovation Specialists for Mid-Continent Public Library, and let's look at Page Layout. As we look at the desktop version of Excel, and go to the Page Layout tab, which is about the 3rd tab here, we can see that we have looked at several of these groups that are on the ribbon in prior videos, but still we have some things that we can look at and certainly compare today. So starting on the left, we have a Themes group. To the right of that is the Page Setup group, and notice that several of these groups also have dialog box launchers, which means that we get even more variety and choices if we click on these little arrows that are pointing to the right that are in the lower right of each one of the groups. To the right of that, we have Scale to Fit, we have Sheet Options, and then Arrange. Looking at the Online Classic ribbon, this is really sort of a surprise in that there's just not much here compared to what we see in our desktop version. So as we look at our Online Classic ribbon, we can see that there is a Page Setup group, but it only has 3 buttons as opposed to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buttons in the desktop version. We also have a Sheet Options kind of group, and as we look at that sheet right to left option, that is it for the Online Classic ribbon. We can see that the Online Single Line ribbon corresponds very closely with the Classic Online ribbon in that they appear to have the same identical buttons. Starting at the left, even though they look a little bit different, we have Page Setup, Print Area, Page Breaks, and then in its own little section, Sheet Right to Left, which matches precisely the sheet options that are here. And then there is no other option, no other buttons that are available within the Online Single Line ribbon. Looking at the ribbons in a little more depth, let's start at the left-hand side of the ribbon where, with the desktop version, we do have a Themes group, and with the Online Classic ribbon and the Single Line ribbon, we do not have those particular buttons. And while you may see this Themes group in Word and PowerPoint, it may not be so evident that you can also use themes in Excel. So let's take a little time and open a blank workbook, and let's see what the different themes can do to help create a spreadsheet that people will like and find easy to read. Let's start by clicking on the drop-down for the Themes button, which is on the very far left here. And when I click on that drop-down, it says there are all sorts of themes. There's Office and Facet and Gallery, and coming on down, Retrospect and Bandit and Circuit and Dividend. And as we look at these different themes, we can see that there are different colors and even fonts associated with them. So let's take a few seconds and look at some of these themes in a little more detail. Our first example is the Office theme, which is what most people use most of the time. And so just for some comparison and some ways to look at things, I added in month names and even put in some numbering here. One of the ways that we can tell what theme we are using is to come up to either the font color or the background color. Let me click on our background color here, where then we have all of these theme colors. And you can see that the theme colors are what I have used for the months and what were just automatically used for the chart. There are also just some standard colors that repeat all the way through regardless of the theme that is being used. But these theme colors will change as we go through. So this is, again, the office theme with, as we look at this, Calibri and size 11 font. Our second example is Facet, and we can see that the colors have changed. Let me go back to the paint pail here, and you should be able to see that there are some changes in those colors, and also just with the months, and especially with the chart and how those colors relate there. You can also see that just as part of the theme, the font has changed to Trebuchet. So some other differences as we go through. Let's look at a third example. Here we have the slice theme, and again the colors for the months have changed. The chart has changed quite a bit in how it looks just by using the colors that go with that theme. Also, the font has changed to Century Gothic, although we're still keeping the 11-point size. And if I look at the paint pail gallery here, you can see that those theme colors have really changed, even though standard colors are still the same as they were from the beginning. Here we have the quotable theme, and again the background colors for the months have changed. The chart has also changed its colors, and if we look at the font, it is Century Gothic, still 11-point though. When we look at that paint pail gallery, the colors have noticeably changed. Look at how much kind of gray and black we have here as we go through, and then of course standard colors did not change. Let's look at one more example. Here we have the mesh theme, and it is also Century Gothic, but look at the backgrounds of those cells, and they are so much different from what we've seen. And of course the chart also reflects those changes. When I go to the paint pail and look at the drop down, boy, those theme colors have absolutely changed. It's sort of a fall coloring here, isn't it? But it's very different from, say, any of the others. And so as you go through, you can look at the themes, choose the colors that you need, look at the fonts that you need, and those themes can really be a nice shortcut for when you're in a hurry, but you want something slightly different from what the default colors and fonts are. I've come back to the original Office theme, but now let's also look at this themes group, because we do have, besides the themes button, we also have a colors button. When we click on the colors drop down, we can see that we have all sorts of color choices here, and as I hover my mouse over them, notice that on the right it shows all of the different kinds of changes that can be made just by choosing one of these color schemes. Now, you may be wondering why there are so many little squares of color for each one of the themes, and to answer that question, we're going to come down to Customize Colors, and here it shows us that we can choose a text or background, dark and light, dark or light. So there are two of them, plus then accents. And you can kind of see then that the accents would have to do with your charts, your bullets, that kind of thing. And then you also can choose the color for the hyperlink and a followed hyperlink. And it's all right here. So even though I have selected a color scheme, I can still come in and change one of these colors to something else, say here instead. So this gives you so much flexibility just in using colors, and it helps you think through how you want your colors to look. Now let's look at one last button in the themes group, and that is the fonts button. And as I hover my mouse over that fonts drop down, it's showing me that my theme is currently Office. The headings are Calibri Light, and the body font is Calibri. And so I can very easily change this by simply using the fonts drop down. Now we have these examples over at the right where we have font heading and font changes for the body and titles. Not all of the fonts have all three of these choices, but let's see if we can find some really interesting changes as we go through. So we'll go to fonts, click on the drop down, and custom one was Gotham, and already it looks quite a bit larger. It just kind of extended out on me, and you can see how the heading and the body, the titles, everything just has a much rounder look to it. As we look at Cambria, that is serif font. Calibri, of course, is what we did have. Arial. And even though everything should remain the same, notice how the fonts, because of their proportional spacing, are going to look like they are moving within the different worksheets that we look at. So here's Corbel, Candera, Franklin Gothic. And so you can go through and look at all of these fonts and decide which ones you like, which ones you don't, and you also have the option at the bottom to customize the fonts. So you can choose what is the heading font that I absolutely want and click on that drop down and then go through and select that, as opposed to the body font and select that. And then you can even give, if it's not, say, Calibri for both the heading and the body, you could even give it a name if you want to do that, so you can always refer back to that theme font name. And as we look on the right, we always get a preview of what we have selected. When we looked at the page setup group earlier, we noted that the desktop ribbon has 7 buttons here within that page setup group, and it even has a dialog box launcher. And then when we compared that group to the online versions where there were only 3 buttons, that became a bit disconcerting. Well, what we can do is that if we go to the printer, or even this page setup button, all of a sudden we have a lot more options that match what we have within the desktop group. So as we look at this, not only do we print the active sheet, and we could even ignore a print area, which is a really interesting kind of choice here, but we have the paper size, and the paper size corresponds with the paper size here, the size button in this desktop version. We can change the orientation, and that matches as well. We have page margins, which that matches. So now I feel so much better because at least these first 4 buttons match, and of course we knew about page breaks matching. So we have a lot more options, and all we are really missing is background and print titles. As we come on down in this drop down, then these options here, the format options and the center on page, may be found within the dialog box launcher's dialog box, or they may be different groups within the desktop ribbon that we just haven't looked at yet. I have the online and the single line online versions. I can see that they match, and so no matter which one I choose, I have some pretty good options here to get the options that I need. I just have to look a little harder when I go to the online versions of the ribbon than when I use the desktop version. As we look at the next group on the desktop ribbon, we can see that it is scaled to fit and that you can change the width of the spreadsheet so that, for example, all of the columns might fit on one sheet when it's printed, or maybe even two sheets when it's printed, but you control how wide the overall effect is. Or you can say, okay, I want to change the height so that I want to have all of the rows in the spreadsheet fit on one page or 2 pages or whatever you choose. Or instead of choosing width and height, which is sometimes a little difficult to determine, you can change the scale of how things are printed so that instead of 100%, it could be 80% or 60%. Now, depending, you really don't want to get much below 65 or 70% because if people really need to be able to read what you are scaling, sometimes that just gets to be too small to really read and understand. But it depends on what you need to do. You have those same options by simply looking here at scaling kind of toward the bottom of, again, what is a print option or a page setup option with the online classic ribbon, and also here with the single line ribbon. But any way you look at this, you can smash as much data as you can on your pages as you print them so that you limit the number of pages that you are printing. And this is one way to control that. Looking at our desktop ribbon again, going on to the right, the next group is the Sheet Options group, and with it you have the choice to view and even print grid lines and or headings. Now the headings are always a little confusing because what they really mean is, do you want to be able to see the A, B, C, D column names, or the 1, 2, 3, 4 row numbers along with the rest of your spreadsheet? Now again, we couldn't find those options with the online version of the ribbon. However, when we go to that page setup button, we have format options, and here we have grid lines where we can turn them on or off, and the row and column headings where we can check the box and turn them on or off. We haven't lost those options either. It's just that they're all under print as opposed to being on the ribbon. Even though we just looked at the Sheet Options group in the desktop ribbon, we found that while it had several buttons, it did not have the Sheet Right to Left button that is in the Sheet Options group in the Online Classic ribbon and the Single Line ribbon. There is an option to change your sheet and how it reads and how it's created instead of generally left to right in English. If you are creating a spreadsheet that is in a language that needs to read from right to left, you can change the default in the desktop version as well, but to do that you need to go to File, Options, Advanced to find that particular setting. And so the Sheet Options Sheet Right to Left is only found in the Online Classic ribbon and the Single Line ribbon. However, before we leave the sheet options, there are other things that we need to look at. I've opened an example spreadsheet and we are at the Page Layout tab. And what is interesting is regardless of where I click this dialog box launcher, it takes me essentially to the same place. So I'm going to go to the page setup, dialog box launcher, click on it, and I get a dialog box that has 4 tabs. Now, as we look at this, some of this repeats the buttons that we see on the ribbon. So, for example, orientation, we can go with portrait or landscape. The scaling is here, and so we have a choice of dialog box or the ribbon. Paper size, print quality is different, and first page number is different as well. So we do have options here that we haven't seen before. When I go to the margins tab, I get an example of what I want to have done with the margins. So I could type in a number, or I can use these arrows, and as I click and change the numbers, you can see that the margin line changes. Now it also gives me room so I can determine where the header is, where the footer is, but also, of course, besides the top margin, the right, bottom, and left margins. Now, we saw with those print options with the online version that we could center on the page horizontally or vertically. Well, we need to use the dialog box launcher if we're going to use the desktop version. And then I can center a spreadsheet. It'd have to be pretty small, but horizontally on a printed page or vertically on a printed page. To the right of that, we have a header footer tab, and this is simply a way to add in a header and footer if you haven't added in one before, or maybe you just prefer to use this method. But you can use the header, the footer, you can put in different odd even pages, a different first page, and this says scale it with the document and align with page. That seems like a given. And then to the right of that, we have a sheet tab. Now this is another place where we can define where a print area is. We can define what we want to use for our print titles that we want to have repeat at the top of each page. But here we have where we can print grid lines, black and white, and this should seem fairly familiar and what we saw with the online version. But we can also say, oh, I want draft quality. The row and column headings is also here, but we can also determine if we want to print comments and notes or even cell errors. And so there are some choices here that we haven't seen before. And then perhaps one of the most important choices that you need to make is, what is the page order? If you have a really large spreadsheet that tends to be landscape, then you would want to make it so that you print over first and then down, as opposed to a portrait spreadsheet where you would print down and then across. But you have all of these options with the dialog box launcher that you don't have other places. However, this really helps us match up our choices between the desktop and the online versions of Excel. The last group in the desktop ribbon is the Arrange group. And you may be familiar with this. It looks very similar to what you might see in PowerPoint or Word. It's a little surprising that it's here in Excel, but basically it helps you arrange any kind of a shape or an image that you may have inserted into your worksheet. So let's switch over to an example. As I look at this Arrange group, I could decide to change the different shapes and where they appear. Right now they are stacked. The blue rectangles on the bottom of the images, and then I have the yellow circle and the red triangles on top. So if I decide to bring this blue rectangle forward, I can bring it forward, and it brings it forward one layer at a time. Bring forward again, and it is going to be on top of the triangle as well. To the right of that, to send backward, again, it's just one layer at a time. So here I see the triangle, send it backwards again, and I can see all three shapes. If I decide to use the bring to the front then it brings it directly to the front, and it goes just on top of however many layers you have, as opposed to sending back where it is just send to back, and it sends it back to where it was. One of the interesting things that I have turned on is the selection pane that shows here on the right, and it gives me a list of all of the different shapes that I have in my worksheet. So I could click rectangle 4 and find what shape is rectangle 4 or rectangle 1, and it shows me by the sizing handles which shape is rectangle 1. And then, since it's selected, I could say change its color or the outline color or do all sorts of interesting things with them. But when you have a very complicated set of images and different shapes that you have inserted, this might be a big help, helping you find what you're looking for and then make the changes that are necessary. Well, along with that then, we also have the Align button. So let me switch over here to a different sheet where, to start off, we have 3 arrows that are pointing to the right. What I might want to do is align these arrows. And so I could align them to the left, but that means that the right 2 arrows will just kind of move over to the left as well. I can align them to the center, in which case they might end up kind of on top of each other in the middle. Well, let's do this instead. Let's first of all align them to the top so that now all of the arrows are in a line in the same row. And then I want to be sure that the one in the middle is actually in the middle, so I could distribute them horizontally, and you can see how that center one moved over just a bit. Well, then we can do the same kind of thing here with these larger arrows that are pointing up, and again, they're not quite in a line. So how do I fix that? Well, I can go to Align, and I might align everything to the right. That might be an easy way to do that. And then again, I would want to distribute them vertically so that they're all equidistant. And this can help you tremendously in trying to make things even and line up. Even with a worksheet that has a grid, it is still so much easier to let Excel do some of this work than to do it yourself. Now let me go back to Arrange one more time, and this time I'm going to select the triangle and the circle and the rectangle, and I'm going to go to the Group button and group these shapes. So now when I grab that shape, it's just one shape, and I can move the whole thing rather than trying to figure out how to move each shape instead of individually all together. Grouping is a great tool to use when you need to be able to move shapes together, or not only move them but resize them and keep everything the same way that it was originally. Now, along with that, we could rotate. Let's go back to our other worksheet here, and let's look at rotate. So I could rotate to the right, and this middle arrow is going to be our example. And now I've rotated to the right 90 degrees, rotate it to the left, and it's going up. Flip it vertically, flip it horizontally, and not so much with arrows, but with images. This is such a nice shortcut if you need to work with items that you have inserted, especially images and different shapes, and make them work for you. To learn even more, be sure to go to mymcpl.org/online learning for such great resources as Universal Class, Learning Express Library, LinkedIn Learning, and Udemy Business. We also premiere videos every Wednesday and Friday at 1 o'clock. If you miss a video premiere, you'll still be able to find it later when it's convenient for you. You can find us on Facebook at MCPL 360, and you can find us on YouTube by going to our MCPL MO channel.